Over the next few lectures, we will learn how to work with strings. And so we're going to be taking a look at a couple of useful string methods. Now, I could have divided this part about strings into many more lectures and go really deep into some topics, but I think it's best to just quickly introduce you to all the topics here and then keep using them in future projects, because we work with strings all the time in JavaScript. And so you will see these methods being used all the time throughout the rest of the course. Anyway, this is going to be really fun, so let's get started. And in this part of the section, we're going to leave the restaurant theme behind and work on stuff related to airplanes and airlines. So that's something that I really like. So let's now start by creating an airline variable here. And I'm using tab air Portugal. All right. And if you want, you can use some other one from your country maybe. But then you might have to adapt the examples. So as a plane, I'm using a string A320. Okay. And now let's do some stuff with this. So just like in arrays, we can get the character of a string at a certain position. So for example, plane at position 0 should be A, right? So let's load this here, and indeed we get A. And the same, of course, for all the other letters, 1, 2, for example. And so indeed, you now get 3 and 2 here, but both of them are still strings. So if we wanted them to be numbers, we would have to convert them. And we can do the same directly on a string. So we can just write the string, and let's write B737 now, which is a Boeing. And so this works the same. Okay, so now we got the B. We can also read the length property of strings, just like we can in arrays. So let's say airline.length, and again we can also do that directly on the string. Okay, there you go. Next up, let's talk about methods. So again, comparing strings to arrays here, strings also have methods, and some of them are quite similar to the array methods. So one of them is the index of. So I believe we talked about this one when we talked about arrays. And so this one works the same way. So we can get the position in which a certain letter is in the string. So let's use R here. And so here we now get the position number 6. And so let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, and that's where this 6 here comes from. So you see that strings are also 0-based, right? And we could observe that already up here. Now this here will only give us the first occurrence, but sometimes we might need the last one. And so then we can use last index of. Last index of. And so that is 10. So this one was 6, then 7, because the space, of course, also counts as a character, then 8, 9, and this is position 10. All right. And we can also search for entire words. So, for example, for the occurrence of Portugal, and so that is at position 8. And this one is actually case sensitive. So if I search with lowercase, then we get -1, because this can now not be found in this airline string. All right. Now, what can we actually do with these indexes? Why are they useful? Well, one good use case is to extract part of a string using the slice method. And the slice method needs indexes as arguments. And so therefore, sometimes it can be very useful to first figure out the index of part of a string to then extract that. So let's see how the slice method works. So airline and then dot slice. And let's write 4 and see the result here. All right. So the result is Air Portugal. And the reason for that is that this here is the begin parameter. So basically it's the position at which the extraction will start. And remember that this is 0 based. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 4 happens to be this A, and so this is where the slice method starts to extract. And now this result that we get here, so just this here, is called a substring, because it's just a part of the original string. Now this does not change the underlying string, okay? Just keep that in mind. That's because it's actually impossible to mutate strings. They are primitives, right? So if we wanted to use this string now, we would have to store it first into some variable or some data structure, okay? So this method here and all the other ones that we're going to talk about always return a new string, okay? And so that's why we can then log that result to the console like this. Now, besides the begin parameter that we already specified, we can also specify an end parameter. So let's try 7 and see the result. And so now we only got air. Okay, so this one is 4, then 5, 6, and 7 is the space here. And so what this means is that the end value is actually not included in the string. All right. So basically it stops extracting before reaching index number 7. And that's really important to keep in mind. And just as a side note, the length of the extracted string is always going to be end minus beginning. So 7 minus 4 is 3. And so that's the length here of air. All right. Okay. Now, up until this point, we have always just hard-coded these values. But of course, many times we don't even know the string that we receive yet, okay? And so let's now try to extract just the first word of this string here, but without knowing any of the indexes. And so that's where this index of and last index of here become really important. So basically that we do not have to hard code these values here. All right, so let's try to extract that first word, as I was saying. So airline.slice, and now we need to figure out the index. And now if we want the first word, we need to start at 0. But what about the end parameter? Well, we want to extract until this space here, basically. So let's find the index of that. So airline.index of, and remember that this will be the first occurrence, and so indeed we get top. All right, and now let's do the opposite, extracting the last word, so slice. And so for the last word, we want to start at the last space here. Okay, that's why we have last index of. So airline dot last index of, and again searching for the space. And now we don't need the end parameter because then if we don't specify it, it will simply extract everything until the end. Okay, but actually now the space is also included here. And so we just need to add +1, and now we're good. So that's the fundamentals of the slice method, but we can do even more with it. So let's go again here, and we can even define a negative begin argument, like this, for example, and then it will start counting from the end, or actually start extracting from the end. So these are the last 2 letters from Portugal. And finally, let's duplicate this one again. And again, I'm using this shortcut here for duplicate. Okay. So we can also specify a negative end parameter. So the begin is back to positive, and now the end is -1. So let's see. And so basically we started at position 1. So that's why the t is cut off. And then the negative n parameter basically cuts off the last character. All right. And so we will need all of these different combinations here in different situations. So it's good that you know how to use them because you will need them at some point. Okay, and now let's practice a little bit what we just learned and write a function that receives an airplane seat and logs to the console whether it is a middle seat or not. So I hope that sounds like fun. So let's write check middle seat, and it is a function which takes in a seat. And just to illustrate it, let me start by calling this function. So check middle seat. And so typically an airplane seat looks like this. So we have the row as a number here, and then the seat itself, so that's like the column, so to say, is then a letter, for example, a B. So it starts from the left and goes all the way to the right side. And in small planes like the A320 or the Boeing 737, we only have 6 seats in one row. And that means that B and E are the middle seats. Let me just write that here. B and E are middle seats. So just in case you're not familiar with how these small planes work, right? And that's also not the point here, of course. So basically all we want to do is to check if the string that we receive contains a B or an E. And if so, then it's a middle seat. And let's call this with a couple of different strings. So 23C and 3E. All right. So what we need to do here is basically take the last character of the string and test whether it is a B or an E, right? So let's get that letter from the seat. Now we'll just call it S for seat again, but I cannot repeat the same name here. So how do I do that now? Well, to extract part of a string, we already know we use the slice method. And how do we take the last character of a certain string? Well, we use -1 as the begin character. And then, as we saw up here, it will start counting basically 1 from the right side. And now it's very easy. If S equals B, or if S equals E, then let's log to the console. You got the middle seat, which is the one that no one wants. Well, let's add an emoji here. Let's say this one. Or else you got lucky. Just any emoji here, just to make it different. And I think we are good now. Let's test it. And so indeed, this here contains the B at the end. And so therefore it's a middle seat. The same for this one. And this person with this seat got lucky. All right. And that's how we extract parts of strings. And that's something really important to do. So maybe if you'd like, you can play around with this some more, maybe come up with your own example. Now, before we move on here, let's just stop for a second and understand why all of this actually works. So we know that strings are just primitives. So why do they have methods? Shouldn't methods only be available on objects such as arrays? Well, that is actually true. However, JavaScript is really smart. And so here is how this works. Whenever we call a method on a string, JavaScript will automatically, behind the scenes, convert that string primitive to a string object with the same content. And then it's on that object where the methods are called. All right? And this process is called boxing because it basically takes our string and puts it into a box, which is the object. So basically, what happens is this. So what JavaScript does is to call this string function here. Okay, and so now you see that this string here looks a little bit more like an object. And we could take a look at this here. And so you see here all of these methods, like slice, that we just used. But this is beyond the scope of this lecture. We will learn what this is a little bit later. But what matters is that this indeed is now an object. So you see, it is an object. And so this conversion here is what JavaScript does behind the scenes whenever we call a method on a string. And then when the operation is done, the object is converted back to a regular string primitive. Okay? And in fact, all string methods return primitives, even if called on a string object. So let me demonstrate this here as well. Just really quick. And actually we want here type of. And so the result of all of this is then back to being a string. Okay, but don't get confused by this. This is just the theory explanation behind why all of this works, in case you're curious. And I hope you are. Great, but now let's move on to the next video where we will continue working with strings.